Hello there, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube, the internet, and the like, and welcome back to Team Fortress 2. Today, I am going to be playing as the construction worker, and I am using the Rescue Ranger, the pistol, and the Eureka effect wrench. I think it's important to start out this commentary by stating clearly that I have not used the Eureka effect ever since it had been patched. It has been well over half a year. Like, prior to the Love and War update, the Eureka effect was patched in one of the TF2 updates, where basically, I don't really know how I'm supposed to, like, label this change at all. I want to say it was nerfed, but at the same time, it added a few things that sort of somewhat benefit the engineer. Just to give a bit of a backstory right here, because I doubt there's a lot of engineers out there who are smart enough to know that the Eureka effect is simply not worth your time, even as a side grade wrench. So, if you're not that hardcore of an engineer that likes to use side grade wrenches, you probably won't be much experienced with the Eureka effect. But prior to the update, what this wrench allowed you to do is it allowed you to teleport to spawn by taunting, and the downside was you wouldn't be able to haul buildings. And I'm sure there are probably a lot of engineers that would be able to work around that sort of penalty, because hauling was not really implemented in stock Team Fortress 2. It took quite a long time before it actually became a thing, and I think that was in 2010 with the Engineer update, if I recall correctly. It's, I don't really know my TF2 history that well. I've been playing since end of summer 2011, and yeah. So, when the Eureka effect was updated, the upgrade and repair rate have both been halved by 50%, so now it takes twice as long to upgrade buildings. It's not really that great. But you do get the benefits of still teleporting to spawn. You can also teleport to a built teleporter exit without building an entrance, which is kind of nice. And lastly, hauling is now been restored to the engineer's abilities, so you no longer have to build a sentry in a really tactful position and just not be able to move it away at all. You can't exactly move that gear up back then, but nowadays, you can haul buildings, and it actually pairs up a lot more effectively with the Rescue Ranger, which is basically it's basically acting as my substitute wrench right now, because of the reduced repair rate, and it actually works quite well. You know, 75 health at maximum per shot is a really good healing factor, and I think everyone should consider using the Rescue Ranger a bit more often, because it is my favorite engineer weapon of all time. So for my current impressions, it's definitely worth testing out the Eureka effect more. I'm sure there's definitely a lot more potential in certain maps and places where engineers would be able to build in certain locations, then be able to teleport back and forth between spawn and a nest in a hurry. I just didn't really see the practicalities during this situation in hand, and you'll probably noticed already I've ignored the key principle of playing engineer, and that is building a teleporter, because obviously I've thrown down an exit. Now, people who might be able to guess what it is I'm doing, good for you, because for those of you who don't quite understand what I'm trying to accomplish right now, what I want to do is I want to build a teleporter, and then I want to bring my sentry through really sneakily behind enemy lines, because a lot of people seem to forget to check that little spot next to the little sign that says A on it, which obviously signifies the fact that this is point A of which the blue team needs to capture. A lot of people tend to forget to check that area for teleporters, and because I haven't even built an entrance, not only do I have to like avoid the particle effect issue, which teleporters often make, but I also don't have to worry about the incessant noise that the teleporter would make, which would obviously attract a lot of enemy players, and they'd eventually find it and take it out. You could argue that if I had a built teleporter, we probably could have been able to hold off point A extremely easily, but unfortunately that's not part of my super sneaky plan of sneakiness, and I guess you're just gonna see what that's like when it appears. But for now, we're just stuck trying to defend the first point. Now, teleporting to spawn safely, I will demonstrate in a short amount of time. It's actually pretty handy, because otherwise, if you are forced to run, there's a very high possibility that you'd be gunned down by just about anything, especially scouts, because of course, scouts run twice as fast as you. They're essentially an upgrade compared to the engineer's combat style. There's not really much you can do, but if you have the ability to just teleport away, well, that's really, really convenient, because then Oh, how about that? I'm already back at spawn. I can start setting up another nest. I guess that's kind of nice, but at the same time, I sort of find it counterproductive to use with this weapon, simply because of the upgrade rate. I mean, if you had another engineer on the team who was kind of working together with you, there's a high chance that it could work out and you'd be able to make a nest effectively in a short amount of time, but unfortunately, that's only in an ideal world, and the ideal world of Team Fortress 2 would be a wonderful world had we not had to suffer some minor differences between how certain players play. To put it lightly, there was another engineer there that would basically rather feel like building his own nest rather than helping me out, so you'll see that when the time comes. Speaking of this loadout in particular, I'm going to somewhat treat this as a self-loadout request, where I basically take a few weapons that I'd normally step out of my comfort zone to use, and try them out in conjunction with each other to see how they would work out. So the Rescue Ranger is a weapon that I tend to use fairly often as an engineer. I'd say it's my favorite engineer weapon that they've ever added. It's definitely got a lot of handy benefits to it. You're able to heal your sentry, you're able to teleport it away if it gets too hairy. There is the downside of taking mini-crit damage once you're hauling a building, but to be honest, I don't really run into this problem that often, so it works out pretty well in my favor in the end. The pistol is a weapon I tend to ignore quite a lot as an engineer. I think there are a few better options depending on what setup I have. The pistol works okay for outputting damage, sort of as a primary, due to the fact that you have this ridiculous ammo cap as an engineer. The spread is a little bit annoying, but if you're up close and personal with any sort of enemy, the firing rate and even the spread to consider is not really that bad. There's not much of a downside to using the pistol in close range. Long range, you can pepper some targets. It's just a fairly decent weapon overall. I just don't really find myself wanting to use it that often. And of course we have the Eureka effect, which I've already talked about. A weapon which I just don't think would be extremely helpful to me at all in any situation where I play engineer, except for this trick which I wanted to perform. And of course you'll see that when it comes up. We're getting fairly close to that point where I simply just say, okay, it's time to get behind enemy lines and see how long I can annoy the blue team. As for right now, just trying to set up my dispenser and trying to keep my sentry up. And of course, this is also the area where the other engineer starts to build, so this becomes a little bit of a mess, and we do admittedly almost manage to hold off the second point, similar to how we held off the first point, but blue team started to initiate that push fairly quickly, and I'm sort of surprised that we actually lost this point, but then again, I'm sort of joyfully surprised too, because it allowed me to do that trick that I want to pull off. And here's a good example of an engineer building his nest right next to mine, so, you know, let's just teleport the sentry right over here, don't need to worry about taking damage while hauling buildings away. That is a prime example of why the engineer's mini-crit vulnerability while hauling is not really that much of a thing to worry about. Only if there was an enemy around this corner where I wanted to take my sentry with me, but to be honest, again, I don't really run into this problem very often, so it works out in my favor where I'm just able to bring my sentry around and try to cover the second point, but now the blue team is only a walking distance away from the cart because of the spawn changes. And I tried to set up my sentry in a different spot, but lo and behold, there's the inevitable sticky bomb demo ban. And at this point, we're starting to sort of get closed down, you know. I want to help this engineer build his sentry, but I just kind of feel bad for having the Eureka effect equipped, because true, I can help a little bit with upgrading other buildings, but I don't feel like I'm really amounting to much, and considering the fact that this is a wrench, I feel as though I'd have to have my own nest in mind to take care of. It's obviously helpful to assist your other engineers, but the Eureka effect kind of falls short on that, and I just generally don't feel like I'm contributing to much if I'm trying to upgrade another engineer's building. And here's another fail sentry going up right here. It's dead now. There's a soldier and a medic combo pursuing me as we speak. But here we go, escaping to safety, teleporting to spawn. And this is the point of the game where I basically say, alright, my team has things covered. I'm gonna go to my really sneaky teleport exit. And I do love the fact that nobody ever seems to check this area. I don't really know what it is about it. Like, you'd think that would be the prime location for just about any building. You'd think the blue team would be the first to notice this, but no, they ignored it entirely in the panic of trying to capture the cart at the last second. And there you go. It was safely concealed, and I don't really need to worry about building an entrance. Now, some people might be curious as to why I haven't bothered building an entrance to begin with, and Simply put, had I built an entrance, there would be tons of red people, like an insane amount of red people just teleporting behind enemy lines, and that would probably raise a few eyebrows on the blue team, so much so that they would start making efforts to try and locate where the stupid teleporter was, and they'd eventually find it out. I obviously don't want this to happen because clearly, as an engineer on my lonesome, I'm able to move the sentry up and annoy the blue team for a short amount of time. Every second counts for as long as you could distract the enemy team. But the unfortunate truth of the matter is, without much team support, I'm eventually just going to probably get swarmed and I'd have to teleport away or possibly die, but thankfully I managed to teleport away to safety before an enemy heavy is able to find me. But first of all, we have to focus on this sentry gun getting a couple of kills. I think it gets maybe about 4 or 5 kills, possibly 6. I don't exactly remember all the numbers because the way I'm watching the video right now and doing the recording, it's a little bit of a distance away. And no, hey, there's a scout. I don't know how that scout got back here. I guess he ran here because the blue team obviously forgot that he was a scout that could get behind enemy lines so much more easily than engineer would be able to do. Teleporting the sentry away, trying to play it in a bit of a different vantage point. It doesn't last for very long. I think it gets one more kill before an enemy heavy decides to take it out. And then I'm just kind of forced to travel back to spawn, where I sort of rethink my strategy and try to build my sentry once again. You'll see that when it comes up. But yeah, not building the entrance, I probably could have done that if I really cared about my team trying to swarm them, but no, I'm being selfish and I just want to try and annoy the other team by myself. Just trying to help the engineers out a little bit. Again, I felt kind of useless, so, let's go ahead and replenish our metal supply and just teleport to our exit and, start building the sentry once again. This actually worked out surprisingly more effectively than I imagined it. I kind of figured that the blue team would be a lot more curious to see how I was managing to get behind them, but the truth of the matter is, without that noisy teleporter being active, I don't have a thing to worry about. So this is a point that you could score with the Eureka effect, is that it's handy in some places, and there are probably a few more maps, again, as I mentioned earlier, where I could perform a very similar trick, but I have yet to test it out. I mainly felt the obligation to use it on Upward because, it's Upward. It's a nice big map, and there's that one spot where I can just build my teleporter exit that nobody ever seems to check. Hint, if you're on the blue team, be sure to check that area constantly because there may very well be an engineer trying to build a sneaky teleporter behind the lines, and that could prove to be a little bit of a nuisance. Hey, it could happen. I'm probably not the first one who thought about doing this, but then again, there aren't really many people that actually use the Eureka effect. And as the gameplay is coming down to a close, I understand that I'm not really doing loadout requests too often. I just need to be a little bit steady with them. So if you have any loadouts that you're trying to submit right now, I'll try to get to them when I get to them, and I'm probably only going to be accepting certain loadouts which I find are relatively sane. Because, if I'm honest, there are a lot of loadout requests that I've gotten where I just kind of shake my head and go, why? Why would you subject me to torture like this? Because there are plenty of different combinations of weapons you could use in Team Fortress 2, but only so many of them actually effectively work, and only so many of them are actually ones that I could potentially appreciate. Some of them, not so much, so again, if you have any loadout requests that you want to submit, do not hesitate to do so. I will try to play with them. Do try to keep them somewhat simple, and try not to give me any challenges that I might want to go out my way to do. I'll just try to play with those loadouts, and if the challenges are optional, I might consider playing and trying to do them as well, but there you go. That's all I really need to say about that, and this is where the gameplay is coming down to a close. End up top scoring as the team's engineer, not really bothering unsapping my sentry right here, just kind of letting the spy get away with it. And yes, that's going to wrap things up. Eureka effect, worth testing out some more, not the best weapon, but that's all that needs to be said. Thank you guys very much for watching, have a great day or evening, and I guess I will see you in the next video.